total is 7. So
Got it. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started then. Hope others will join us. All right, good afternoon. This is Transportation Committee Chair Deb Barber. It is Monday, February 14th, 2022. Before I call the meeting to order, I'd like to say a few things about how we will conduct this meeting. I want to acknowledge that COVID-19 is causing us to alter our usual procedures. Due to the ongoing pandemic, Council Chair Zelli has determined that it's not reasonable or prudent to conduct in-person meetings at this time. Accordingly, Met Council members will participate in this meeting by phone or other electronic means, and this Transportation Committee meeting will be conducted under Minnesota Statute Section 13D.021. Because we are conducting the meeting electronically, all votes must be taken by roll call. Before we start the meeting, we need to establish whether there is a quorum. With that, Jenna, can you call the roll, please?
Barber.
Here.
Chambliss. Cummings.
Here.
Fredson.
Here.
Gonzalez.
Here.
Sterner. And Zirin.
All right, having a quorum present, I call to order a meeting of the Metropolitan Council Transportation Committee for February 14th, 2022. Our first order of business is approval of the agenda. If there are no changes or additions, we can move ahead to approval of the minutes. All right, we'll move to approval of the minutes for the January 24th, 2022 meeting. Did anyone have any changes or additions? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the January 24th, 2022 meeting.
Cummings moves approval.
It's moved by Cummings. Is there a second?
Fredson will second.
Seconded by Fredson. Is there any other discussion? All right, seeing and hearing none, Jenna, can you call the roll, please?
Chambliss. Cummings.
Aye.
Fredson.
Aye.
Gonzalez.
Aye.
Sterner. Zirin. And Barber.
Aye, and with that, the minutes are approved. I believe we're going to have some people here to from the public to address the committee, but I'm not sure that I'm seeing them. Greg or Jenna, could you advise me if they're on the call?
Yeah, I don't see them, and nor have I received an email.
All right, if they do pop on later, we will give them the opportunity to speak in case anyone's having connection issues or something like that. But we'll move ahead with our reports in the meantime. Our first report is our TAC report, and we have David Fenley here.
Good afternoon, everyone. My video is on. Great to see you all. Chair Barber, council members, great to be here yet again. David Fenley, Chair of the Transportation Accessibility Advisory Committee. Quick update on our meeting from February, and then just one little extra piece of information about what we are working on. I'll start with the priority seating work group that's been going on for almost a year now. We have a video, it's posted. I'm sure you all have seen it. I've talked about it before, but we're satisfied with it. That work group will be putting together a few more materials as well. And one fun result of this project was the fact that now that the light rail seats are not fabric, we can stick priority seating stickers right onto the seats that are for folks who are aging and folks who have disabilities. So that was one fun outcome from the work group. Another thing that came out of the work group too, according to many of the TAC members and also some Metro Transit staff, this was actually some of the closest work that TAC members and Metro Transit staff have done together. So some of the project managers and myself deemed it necessary to formalize the process with which TAC interacts with Metro Transit staff to make sure that communication is smooth and that everybody is included. So that was another fun outcome of that. This is one of the things that I really wanted to move forward with while I have been chair of TAC, was to have a better relationship, more working relationship between TAC members and staff, but that needs to be formalized so communication goes smoothly. We had an update from Council Member Chambliss on the police work group. We had some suggestions for them, and otherwise it was good. And then finally we met with Selena Martina, who who is the senior manager of equity inclusion over there at the Metropolitan Council. I think there's some overlap, and we'll be able to learn from her and also hopefully inform some of her work. But that is all I have for today, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Okay, good. Thank you, David. Are there questions from council members? All right, I don't have any questions, but again, I really appreciate these updates. I really do, and I'm glad to hear that the communication path is, I know that was a big objective that you had coming into this role, that we're really getting some of those good dialogues going, because I think it just helps us overall as an organization. So thank you so much for your time and coming to report to us. We really do appreciate it.
My pleasure, Chair, and I do have to commend Metro Transit Metropolitan Council staff for willingness to work closely with us too. It's not something that you have to do. It's something that you choose to do. I think everybody's better off because of it, but they deserve a thank you as well.
All right, thank you so much, David. Now I'll move on to our other reports. We have MTS Director Carlson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A few items to report on tonight. The 2022 regional solicitation for about $180 million of federal funds is getting ready to open. I've shared before that overviews of the process have been underway. Before your next meeting, we should have the application system actually open to receive applications, and an announcement will be released when that occurs. Applications are due April 14th, with scoring across the summer and decisions on project selection late this year. On the finance side, motor vehicle sales tax receipts for January 2022 were flat with last January at 26 million received by the council, 26 million. So actual receipts were about 9% below forecast. So this actually contrasts with all sources in the state, where last week it was reported tax collections were 25% higher than expected, led by corporate tax receipts. So while no single month is a good performance indicator, we'll be watching closely for the February forecast update and the overall trend on MVEST. And then in our contracted services, I've reported before that we're amending our service contracts to improve hourly wages for drivers to a minimum pay of $20. For the most part, these are now executed, and providers have reported that the increased pay has actually resulted in increased applications. Some contractors are even reaching out to former operators to see if they're interested to return at higher pay. Meanwhile, the COVID case count continues to drop, and very significantly, and we've seen service quality improve as operator availability has been restored. So we're very happy with that. And then finally, you may have seen news reports of a bus fire affecting a bus in our regional fleet. So last Friday, a coach bus at the Southwest Transit Garage caught fire. The cause of the fire is under investigation. And unfortunately, I need to clarify, this is a different bus than the Metro Mobility bus that caught fire after an accident on February 4th. So the Southwest bus was a 45-foot coach bus. Reminder for this group that the council owns the regional fleet, including the Suburban Transit Association providers bus fleet. That vehicle appears to be a complete loss, and other vehicles in the garage will need cleaning due to smoke from the fire. Extent of damage remains underway, and MTS fleet management staff are working with Southwest Transit staff on this item. Fire suppression systems in the garage help contain the fire, along with emergency response from Eden Prairie. And unfortunately, 4 firefighters were injured from smoke inhalation, according to media reports. 3 treated on scene and 1 transported for some additional treatment for smoke inhalation. So wishing a quick recovery to the responders. And that concludes my report, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Charles. Are there questions for Director Carlson? I have a quick question. So, and you may have answered this and I missed it. So when something like this happens with a bus in the suburban transit provider fleet, do we take responsibility for the investigation, or do they take primary responsibility for the investigation?
Yeah, so we work with them. I think it's really a combination, Madam Chair, between the opt-out provider, the Suburban Transit Association provider, the local emergency response jurisdiction, and then working with us on insurance and other factors that come into kind of making the council's investment whole.
Thank you. All right. Additional, Councilmember Fredson?
Thanks, Chair and Director. I'm curious to know on the MVest collections if we know if we're able to trace whether or not it's connected to supply chain issues. You know, I know that new vehicles and even used vehicles have been tough to for dealers to sort of stock up on and sell. So do we know if it's that or is there not a way to gauge that?
Yeah, good question, Madam Chair, Councilmember Fredson. The data we have are really about tax receipts as opposed to the factors going into it. Anecdotally, we do know that prices are up and supply is down, but the specifics from there are something we're continuing to track. We know that if people could, they would buy more vehicles than they currently are, but it is impacted by supply chain. Sounds like Wes may have further
Wes.
insights.
Yeah, Madam Chair and members, I would also mention that we do monthly projections of MVest, which are based upon historic patterns of the fluctuations of car purchases over a year. It's in some sense it gives you a pattern, but you can't rely on 1 month's data to know whether there's a real problem that exists, because the monthly purchasing behavior does fluctuate significantly. So I'm not suggesting that there isn't a downward trend in car purchases, but I'm suggesting that 1 month's data is difficult to discern from.
Councilmember Fredson?
Thank you. And just a quick follow up and, preaching to the choir here, but I just think this is another good example of the need for us to find a reliable funding source that actually goes up, over time, as opposed to the motor vehicle sales tax. So thank you.
Okay. Additional questions or comments? I'll finish this with one just little comment. So big thank you to the first responders out in Eden Prairie, and sending well wishes to all of them. And also a big thank you to the Metro Mobility driver who's quick at thinking and action on that particular day saved probably not only themselves but their passengers. So very, very important to recognize these things, that we really have to be thankful for the people who can respond in moments when the rest of us can't. So much appreciation to all. So now we'll turn over to Metro Transit General Manager Quaistor for his report.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. I'm going to begin with the COVID update. As we ended up with more than 300 reported COVID cases in January. That is by far the most cases we've ever had in a single month. But so far in February, when we're at mid-February, we've recorded only 15 cases. So this is really just about 10% of the case rate we were seeing in January. So our cases, of course, are following the patterns we're seeing statewide and locally, as I always report that they do. But it's pretty remarkable downward spike that we're seeing at this time. At this point, the operational impacts we experienced during the Omicron spike have largely been resolved. We're not seeing many missed trips or late trips like we were seeing in mid-January when Omicron was spiking at that time. Turning to an update on our operator staffing, we're about 33 operators below our ideal levels of full-time and part-time weekday operators. We continue to promote our openings. This includes hiring events. We had about a dozen candidates who attended our event on Saturday, with 5 candidates passing the interview process, none with current CDLs. So we're struggling a little bit in keeping up with attrition, which runs about 12 operators per month. So we still have strong concerns about our ability to hire operators. Our next event is scheduled for Wednesday from 4 to 7 p.m. at our instruction center. Finally, I'll mention that we officially submitted the zero emissions bus transition plan to the state legislature on Friday, following the council's adoption last Wednesday. Thank you for that. And the plan is available on our website, so we are raising awareness about it. We are also raising awareness about it via social media. I want to once again recognize the staff involved in that work, Carrie and And Matt Dake's leadership has been wonderful, and all the staff that worked around their leadership it's really created a good product that we can report to the legislature. If you're getting questions about the plan, do let us know. If you need information to respond to those questions, we'd be happy to provide that. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions for General Manager Koistra? All right, thank you, Wes. Next, we're on to our consent items. There is only one item on consent. There is no presentation, but we're just going to move the item as it is because there's just the one thing. So I would entertain a motion to approve the item on consent, which is business item 2022-37.
So move.
Moved by Councilmember Gonzalez. Is there a second?
Hudson will second.
Seconded by Fredson. Is there any other discussion? Seeing and hearing none, Jenna, could you call the roll, please?
Chambliss, Cummings,
Aye.
Fredson,
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Sterner, Zirin, and Barber.
Aye. With that, the motion passes. Next, we're on to business item 2022-38, which is the Metro Purple Line Bus Rapid Transit Engineering and Project Management Services Contract. And I believe we have Craig Lamont here to present.
Yes, good
Hi,
afternoon.
welcome.
Madam Chair and committee members, Craig Lamoth, Purple Line Project Manager. I've also got our Procurement Director, Jody Jacoby, here with me tonight. She and I will be co-presenting this item. Tonight, we're seeking your recommendation to move forward with contract award for engineering and project management services for the Purple Line. So this, a little bit about the scope of work for this contract. This is the largest anticipated professional and technical services contract for the project. A major engineering focus will be on completing design over the course of the next 2 years. So hopefully by the end of 2023, we are concluding design of Purple Line. And then the major initial project management focus for this consultant team is going to be the project's first major submittal to the Federal Transit Administration, seeking the Federal Transit Administration's rating of project merit. That'll be published in spring of 2023 in an annual report to Congress. That submittal is due to FTA in the late summer timeframe. Next slide, please. So Ramsey County has led this environmental analysis phase that just concluded with the Federal Transit Administration entering the project into the Capital Investment Grant Program as a New Starts project on December 9th of 2021. Both the Federal Transit Administration and the Federal Highway Administration both issued their environmental decisions on the project also in late 2021. So we are now officially in the project development phase. So with a little luck, a lot of hard work and close collaboration with our project partners, we would expect to be readying for revenue service in about 4.5 years' time. So at this time, I'm going to turn over the mic to Jody to cover the next couple of slides about the procurement process we went through.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Jody Jacoby, and I'm the Procurement Director, and I'm going to talk the next few slides just about the procurement process. So a really high-level overview. October 12th, the request for proposal, the RFP was issued, and this was a federally funded project. As a result, a DBE, or a Disadvantaged Business Enterprise goal, was assigned, and there was a 22% goal assigned. The project was advertised for 47 days, and there were a total of 23 registered plan holders who downloaded the documents. And these plan holders included 20 different architectural and engineering consulting firms, one firm that identified as a subcontractor, and then two plan rooms. Procurement facilitated a pre-proposal meeting on October 20th, and there were 13 different consulting firms or vendors that attended. Some information that was shared at that pre-proposal meeting, including specifics on the solicitation requirements, DBE submittal requirements, and then they discussed some project specification and answered some specific questions that vendors asked. Proposals were due on November 29th, and at that time, a single proposal from Kimley Horn was received. Next slide, please. The standard procurement process when we receive a single bid or proposal is to stop and have an adequate competition analysis that's conducted by a different procurement agent who had no involvement with this process. And one of the things that they do is they contact all of the plan holders who did not submit a proposal and ask them why they didn't, to find out if there was anything that may have been restricted or limited competition. And what we found out is that it's pretty obvious there's a lot of public projects happening right now. In this project, there was a lot of different specialties. And so some of the firms teamed up to submit a proposal. At the end of the adequate competition analysis, it was determined that there was nothing in the specifications that was restrictive, either with the specifications or the scope of work. So then procurement facilitated an evaluation panel review, and it included internal staff from the council and many of our stakeholders, including MnDOT, the City of St. Paul, Ramsey County, City of Adams Heights, and City of White Bear Lake. At the conclusion of the negotiations, a best and final offer was negotiated with Kimley Horn, and they were able to negotiate a much lower price. And today the recommendation is in front of you to proceed with that award to Kimley Horn based on the most advantageous proposal submitted to the council for this project. And I'll turn it back over to Craig.
Thank you, Jody. Wanted to take a little bit of time on this next slide to talk a little bit about the project and the support for the project. This project really dates back to the late 1990s. That was really the first step in the planning process. And as the previous name for this project, the Rush Line, indicates, at what point in time this project was looking to be a project that was likely heavy passenger rail operating on freight rail tracks, serving all the way up to Rush City, well north of the Twin Cities. And as a result of the planning that has gone on for the last 20 years on this project, things have evolved, but all along the way, there's been a lot of public process. Most recently, Ramsey County had initiated the pre-project development phase, which was indicated in that schedule slide earlier in the slide deck. They initiated that in 2014. That phase really concluded with the selection and recommendation of the locally preferred alternative, which was BRT between downtown St. Paul and downtown White Bear Lake. And that selection recommendation was made in May of 2017 by the Policy Advisory Committee for the Rush Line project, which consisted of policymakers primarily representing all the corridor communities between St. Paul and White Bear Lake. And then between 2018 and 2021, Ramsey County advanced the project design to greater than 15% complete, sought project partner support for those preliminary design plans. And then also under the direction of the Federal Transit Administration, Ramsey County also completed the environmental assessment, which is essentially the environmental review document for the project. They published that document to the public for review and comment in May of 2021. But not unlike most transitway projects, the Purple Line has not had unanimous support. For example, there has been a mix of opinions on the White Bear Lake City Council dating back at least to their resolution of support for the locally preferred alternative, which was a split vote. And then more recently in late November, a pause the project resolution was introduced by a White Bear Lake City Council member. That resolution failed to pass. But this contract is flexible enough to adapt to any future changes, both in the federal program requirements as well as in any local policy direction. Next slide, please. So the recommended action before you tonight is seeking your recommendation to the council to authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute contract 21P242 with Kimley Horn and Associates to provide design, engineering, and project management services for the Metro Purple Line Bus Rapid Transit Project in an amount not to exceed $34,998,088. Next slide, please. With that, I'd be happy to stand for questions. Also want to note here, since the last time I was before this body in the fall, we've since activated a project website for the project, which can be found at the link on this slide. And as always, I can always be reached at any time via email.
Very good. Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Jody. Are there questions from council members? Councilmember Gonzalez.
Thank you very much. Not a specific, well, yeah, kind of a specific question actually. In view of the information that we receive about the opposition at the local level, at least by some elected officials, the fact that we only had a one bid and all within the context of the issues that we had on the Southwest line. I would just like to ask all the technical folks to be extra careful and to review the details as much as possible on this particular project, which I understand it's not as complex as the Southwest one, but still the amount of review and skepticism is going to be there. So just a cautionary note to make sure that we double cross all the T's and double dot all the I's in this particular project as we move forward. And one last thing is that if there are any lessons that we can learn from the recent projects as far as on the engineering side, on the design side, and on how to communicate with stakeholders and folks that might be affected by the construction, that please we implement those from the beginning, and hopefully we can have a smoother process this time. So thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Councilmember Gonzalez. Those are all great points. The project team is definitely taking those points into consideration. For example, we are in the process right now of hiring up community outreach staff to make sure that we have enough of those resources in-house. And additionally, this contract will bring support in many areas, including community outreach and communications, recognizing the importance of the transparency and working with our project partners as well as the public in general within those communities. We're also coordinating on a regular basis with the other projects, in particular Gold Line. And we're benefiting hugely from Purple Line. Gold Line is a very similarly scoped project, but it's 2 years out ahead of Purple Line. So we're definitely taking the advantage of lessons learned, any bumps in the road that Gold Line may have hit to avoid those bumps, and then just best practices.
Thank you.
Councilmember Fredson.
Question for Mr. Lamothe, and don't mean to put you on the spot here. You did highlight that the previous city council vote in White Bear Lake was divided. Does that mean that all of those other cities had unanimous endorsements of the project, or were you just lifting up White Bear Lake because there are elected officials on the record in opposition to the project there?
The White Bear Lake example, Madam Chair and Councilmember Fredson, the White Bear Lake example, I chose to pick that one because that is most relevant to right now. In addition, that was the closest vote all along. So dating back to 2017, it was a 3-2 vote in favor of the project. I'm not sure if it was unanimous. I suspect it may not have been unanimous in all those other communities. It's not uncommon that you might have a council member that chooses to vote in opposition to the project, but in some communities, I suspect it was unanimous.
Thank you.
All right. Any additional questions or comments? All right, seeing and hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve business item 2022-38.
It's Fredson. I'll move the staff recommendation.
It's moved by Fredson. Is there a second?
Second by Gonzalez.
Seconded by Gonzalez. Is there any other discussion? All right, seeing and hearing none, Jenna, could you call the roll, please?
Chambliss, Cummings,
Aye.
Fredson,
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Sterner, Siren, and Barber.
Aye. With that, the motion carries. Thank you very much, Craig. Next, we're on to our, first we should, I recommend, I'm thinking that the purple line item should go non-consent to the full council, and the one that was originally on consent can go consent, as long as everyone agrees. All right, very good. Now we're on to information. Our first information item is the 2022 Transportation Committee Work Plan, and we have Wes Koistra and Charles Carlson here to present.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll introduce the item and then turn it over to Wes, and then we can seek any input from the committee tonight. So this is a annual report or a list of projects that really focuses on information items that may come before the committee across the course of the year. There's a change in this year's approach from past reports. The work plan has typically had, there's sort of one list for Metro Transit items and one list for MTS items. What we did this year is actually a little bit of work to try and put them together as a single list for the committee to take a look at, and then denote it in this list where something's maybe more on the Metro Transit side, where it's MTS, or where it's both. And so within this, I think we're recognizing that there's a lot of work underway, both at Metro Transit and at MTS, far more than we could ever bring before the committee in a reasonable amount of time. So instead, we might think of this as really a longer list than we could bring, but potential topics that we'd curate both as they're ready across the year and to the interests that council members might have. Certainly a number of different topic areas, both transit and outside of transit. These often, flow into business items that may come before the committee across the year, but really are in this list are focusing on information items. We do seek to get some input from the committee members on which topics may be a higher priority or of greater interest. And I think, before we bring this back as a business item next time, we'd like to hear feedback from the council members on which topics are of special interest. With that, I think I'll invite Wes to continue to elaborate or fill in where I have maybe missed anything.
Need to get back online, excuse me. Madam Chair and members, I'll mention that in the past when we've done this, we've given you time with the document, and we've just asked for you to send us your thoughts and ideas about what are priorities to you, as Charles mentioned. Also, if there's something missing on the list, to point that out that might be a priority to you, and then we work together to try to put together a final document that represents those priorities to best we can within the time we have. I just want to also mention that there are some items that are not on here that would go to the committee of the whole or to the full council. For example, you don't see an item on here talking about Green Line extension because those updates are typically brought to the committee of the whole. Another example of that would be the police reports, which in the original charge of the Police Review Committee, it was assumed that we'd be providing quarterly police reports to the committee of the whole or to the full council. And so we're assuming that in this list that would go to the committee of the whole. The other part of that charge to the Police Review Committee was to get some instruction and direction from the council on what they'd like to see contained in those reports. So that's all part of the police review process. And there may be others that we may not have time to provide here. We choose to bring to the committee of the whole because of the broad general interest by the council. I know with transit, there is a lot of times a broad general interest. We always make those judgments about what we bring to this committee versus what we bring to the full council. So we're in closing, we're welcoming your feedback. You can send emails to me or Charles or to both of us with respect to what your priorities are and what you see missing, and then we'll try to do our best to incorporate that into the final work.
Very good. Thanks, Wes and Charles. And because we did have a couple of council members who were not available this evening, I have asked Jenna to send it out and send out that same request to make sure that we get the right feedback and get a little time to sit with it and figure out if there are things we want to add to this. So now with that little tidbit, I'll hand it, see if there's any comments from council members. All right, they're awfully quiet, so I guess that means that everyone wants to go look at it. There, Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Director, Madam Chair. No, I'm just wondering, it sounds like what you want is our comments as we review this in more depth in writing rather than right now. Is that right?
Well, Madam Chair,
I would say either. So, but
Yeah.
I'll let Wes if he
no, Madam
disagrees.
Chair, I was just going to say that we'd certainly you can certainly record comments that you give us now, and I was going to say the same thing, and we can do it either way.
Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you. I'll just throw out that I know we get through reports, but I would hope again that we could get some really thorough information about our relationship with suburban transit providers. There's been a lot of information or a lot of articles, not necessarily information, but articles in the press and in the media, so forth, about recently about things that have been contentious, and I would be interested in the impact of the coronavirus on changes to suburban transit providers, especially in the changes, red line and so forth. But if we can have I think it's really important that we have a really thorough, detailed, and complete picture of our relationship and the ongoing relationship and the challenges and the changes and so forth. So that would be my input today anyway, just at a glance at what was in the business item.
Councilmember Cummings, just a question from my perspective. So we have the suburban providers coming in Q3 to the Transportation Committee as we've done in the past. Do you want more of like a kind of refresher of how the relationships work or some of those things earlier in the year? Or what are you looking for?
At least at some point before they come, if we can get sort of, again, a thorough overview of the relationship as it was conceived and as it has changed over the years, especially recently, because I have a sense that there have been more changes recently. So I'd like, to have the Met Council perspective and then a little bit closer, and then when we get to the suburban providers input as well. So just so that we have both sides fairly close together, so that, not that they're sides, but the information from both perspectives, so that we can have a thorough understanding.
Sounds good. Charles, do you have any comments?
No, Madam Chair, that approach sounds good to me, and we can, that's good feedback as we work on the final work plan.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Cummings. Councilmember Fredson, anything right now?
Oh, thank you.
Okay, how about Councilmember Gonzalez?
No, we're good. Thank you.
All right, sounds good. So we will sit and reflect on this, and we'll send you back any comments or thoughts that we have. I do really like the list altogether instead of broken out into Metro Transit and MTS. I think we've done a lot of work to try and, look towards common goals and be as efficient as possible. And I think this is a good example of that. So I appreciate you guys taking the time to do that. I think it makes a lot more sense and makes it, helps us sort of tackle it holistically. So I appreciate that. All right, then we can move on to our next item, which we have the Q4 2021 annual ridership report, and we have Eric Lind and John Harper here to present.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. I am John Harper. I'm the manager of contracted transit service in MTS, and I'm here with Eric Lind, who is manager of analytics and research. And Chair Barber, to your point of bringing things to the committee together, we've done a we've worked hard, Eric and I, and the two groups to um, combine the MTS and the Metro Transit perspectives into these ridership reports. And hopefully today we will skate through this presentation in a speedy fashion and close out 2021 for you. And I will begin by talking through some high-level slides. Eric, as per usual in his role of analytics and research, will kind of hone in on an aspect which we bring to you each quarter, one aspect of the ridership to hone in on. So I will start the presentation here. If we go to the next slide. This chart shows 2020 and 2021 ridership, and as you can see, COVID impacted transit service almost exactly 2 years ago. At the end of March of 2020, we cut service dramatically. Ridership went down dramatically due to the impacts of COVID on our transit service. This presentation, the first part here will break up into a couple pieces. One will just kind of show you where we're at, and then one slide will try to remove the noise of that first quarter of 2020 to show you how we are compared to COVID last year instead of just annual to annual. So let's move on to the next slide. This slide, as usual, shows you the modes and types of service that make up our ridership. And I'll just point out here, as we all know, the commuter and express ridership is a much smaller portion of our work in 2021 than it was in 2020 for the reason I just mentioned. That to me is the kind of the biggest note to mention here. So this, like I said, shows the modes and types of service, with local bus being our workhorse and light rail being a significant portion of our service and our ridership. Let's move on. This compares totals 2020 to 2021 for the council ridership as a whole. And you can see the numbers here. The one point that I will break out for you specifically, you see that Metro Mobility ridership is actually up this year from 2020. That is primarily due to the significant reduction that Metro Mobility service had in Q2, in particular, of 2020, when COVID struck. The Metro Mobility ridership went down, almost down to zero, and we've been working our way back, and we are now at approximately 75% of pre-COVID ridership on Metro Mobility. And Eric will get into that a little bit later. But that's one place where we have seen the ridership really come back, and in other places here we are recovering. So let's move to the next slide. This slide removes the pre-COVID portion of 2020 from the comparison. So it's Q2 through Q4 of 2020 to 2021. And you'll see in all cases, we are up from the beginnings of COVID. So ridership dropped, as I mentioned, at the end of the very first quarter of 2020, and we have been gradually working our way out of that ridership hole, so to speak. Some services are up much more than others, but you can see the numbers here, and all of the modes and all of the types of service operated at the council. We are seeing ridership rebound from the heart of the COVID pandemic. So next slide, please. This slide breaks down the bus service into its bus type components. And this, once again, is back to the year as a whole. So this includes the first quarter of 2020. And as I mentioned in the stacked chart earlier, express ridership is really where we've taken the biggest hit in our ridership in this region, and that's true across all the different providers in the region, and really nationally, as express ridership is where the brunt of the ridership decreases have taken place, and we certainly have felt that here. So next slide, please. This slide brings in the other regional providers, and talking about express service on the previous slide, the service reductions that you see on this slide really are indicative of that express service drop. We have really, across the board at the various agencies, including us and the suburban providers as well, the express ridership went down precipitously with the start of COVID. And the reductions that you see here are really an indicator of that reduction in express ridership. Some providers are more heavily express. Maple Grove, for example, is primarily an express provider, and so their reduction is down 54% as opposed to MVTA, which has local service, and so their ridership wasn't hit quite as hard. There are dial-a-ride services in most of these service areas as well, and those rides are incorporated into the numbers here too. And I think we have seen the dial-a-ride numbers increase somewhat as a rebound from the depths of the COVID reduction. And the U of M ridership, I believe this number for the U of M is fiscal year 2020 to fiscal year 2021. And so I will comment that the U of M ridership in the last few months of this year increased. Now that the students are have returned to campus, that number has gone up significantly on the U service. But while the U was distance learning, the ridership was down significantly. Next slide, please. So at this point, I'll turn the presentation over to Eric to kind of drill down a little bit into the numbers that I just presented at a high level and provide some key takeaways, and then we'll take some questions. So Eric, thank you.
Thanks, Madam Chair and council members. So as John was sort of mentioning, it's very difficult to look at years as coherent units during COVID. Of course, time has got very strange meaning during COVID in general, but when you're talking about year-over-year comparisons, you have to be careful. So the next few things I wanted to concentrate on just show what happened over 2021 as a year from beginning to end. And this can help us understand a little bit of what was happening. So first, looking at all of the different council services, what this graph is showing is the percent of pre-COVID. So think, what would it have been in 2020, had COVID not happened, and comparing what we observed throughout 2021. So for instance, that top dotted line represents metro mobility, and you can see a very steady around 70 to 80% across the year. So that means that metro mobility ridership was down 20 to 30%, pretty continuous across the year 2021. So if we move down to the next one, the darker line, darker blue, which represents BRT, and like the green light rail line and the red dash regular bus line in the fixed route world, those all showed sort of steady increases with their highest ridership in the fall. The BRT was the most robust type of fixed route service, with it peaking out at about 70% of pre-COVID ridership, but overall was definitely more resilient. And again, we saw that in John's earlier chart with it being down only 1% year over year. Transit Link in the light blue dashed line, was around 50 to 60% of its pre-COVID ridership. And then North Star, they're in the gray, being essentially a dedicated office commute line and event support line, had much stronger impacts of the loss of those commutes, of the rise of telework and so on. And so it was in its best months around 15% in October of what it would have been pre-COVID. Next slide, please. So to go even further, what I wanted to do was actually look at all the weekdays of the year, which is what's represented here. So each dot or square is a single day, and the ridership is over there of that day on Metro Transit service. And the colors represent the type. So we've lumped all the regular commuter express bus, local bus, suburban local bus into orange colored dots. The two light rail lines are grouped together in green squares. The BRT lines are red triangles, and the North Star are those blue pluses. And so this just gives you an idea of the scale of the different modes. So as John mentioned before, bus is the sort of highest ridership mode, followed by light rail. So it's kind of split. If you add BRT and regular bus together, it's about 2/3 or a little more, light rail about 1/3. So I'm going to walk through 3 different slices of the year to kind of tell a story about what our ridership looked like during the past 12 months. So next slide, please. So the first slice is what I would call COVID era normal. It's hard to remember back to a year ago, but early 2021, vaccination was not widespread. The pandemic was still in a very uncertain place. We hadn't gotten to, a firm idea of when, for instance, people would be gathering in big groups again and that sort of thing. So that uncertainty through the year kind of did go down as vaccinations became more widespread, and we did start to see more use of the transit network. You can see a sort of a slight increase looking at those orange dots on the bus network, from 50,000 to over 60,000 rides a day. So not approaching pre-pandemic, but definitely increasing in this kind of COVID era normal. So this is a very strong base of our ridership. And if you remember prior conversations in this group, we talked about how there weren't sort of 2 peaks in the day. It was kind of a single peak late in the afternoon, the different types of travel that were happening. So next slide, please. So we came to the fall, and as you can sort of look at this chart, there was a noticeable change in level of ridership. And so this burst of ridership corresponded with a great deal of activity, not so much in office commutes, but especially in school commutes. So John just mentioned the University of Minnesota went back to full in-person learning. Other colleges in the Twin Cities did as well. The high schools in Minneapolis and St. Paul, of course, use Metro Transit service for their students. And in 2021, St. Paul actually reached out to Metro Transit to try to expand its high school pass program because, again, with the theme of the day, St. Paul was having trouble finding operators for their school bus network. So they used Metro Transit to kind of augment travel for their students. And we saw that in the ridership. There was a lot more consistent commuting, and there were starting to be peaks in the day, and it would be about 7 a.m. But then the afternoon peak would be about 3 p.m., which is correspondent with a lot of student travel activity and not so much office commute. So that just continuing that story that is a missing trip type on our system, even through late 2021. Next slide. Okay, then we came to the end of the year, which I was kind of terming things fall apart a bit, but this is when Omicron arrived. We had a coincidence of, the direct impact of that COVID explosion, basically taking a lot of our drivers off the street because they were either sick themselves or caring for loved ones. We had the sort of indirect effects of lots less travel happening because in general people were staying home or did not have the places to go that they did before. And of course, we have usually a decline in seasonal demand around the time of the holidays, but this was a much stronger decline, which we can largely chalk up to COVID. So next slide, please. So overall, what we're seeing is, across the year and looking at those Q2 to Q4 comparisons, I think we can see that we saw increased demand last year, even during COVID. We really got bolstered by return to regular travel patterns in the student community. And we hope to see that continuing both with high school and university college ridership this spring. Just to reemphasize what we've said before to this committee, which is that the high frequency network, the metro network, all day, all purpose trips is still the strongest part of our network. That's where we saw the least declines. And again, it provides us a really solid base moving forward to build upon. Next slide. So challenges, COVID-19 is the challenge. If we can solve that socially, and become more predictable in the travel that people are making, we can do a better job of providing the opportunities for people to travel on our network. So we really want that to happen, as does everyone else. The theme of operator availability that Wes referred to earlier is very important. We can't provide the service that we want to unless we have the full complement of operators. And when we don't have the full complement, we end up with things like reduced schedules, which we've done, and having trip cuts, kind of ad hoc trip cuts at the moment rather than planned service reductions. And both of those are bad for ridership in ways that I'm sure you can imagine. Finally, we're going to continue to try to understand what the new travel patterns are going to be. We have, of course, partnered again with MTS and their travel behavior research people to hopefully implement the TBI onboard survey sometime soon. We have some pilot data that we're just looking at in terms of how people are using the system. So we can't necessarily forecast when things are going to go back to what they were before, if they ever do, but we can keep using all these different data sources we have available to understand what the current travel market is and try to meet that with our service. So I think that is the last slide, and John and I will stand for questions.
Very good. Thank you, John and Eric. All right. Questions from council members? I'm not seeing anything. Just a quick comment. I do like the way that you guys have pulled together the way you're presenting this information. I think it really does tell a good story. I'm really curious to see what happens in the second half of 2022. I think it might take that long for things to quiet down, assuming we don't get another new surprise with COVID-19. But I'm very curious to see. But I think you've created a framework that we have good metrics to measure against. And thank you also for putting the data together with the quarters 2 through 4 so that we're getting a chance to really look a little more at apples to apples. I think that's really helpful because as we're trying to figure out how fast to bring back and expand service, I think it's that we have to keep that context of not just wanting to bring ridership back to 2019 levels, but also knowing that no matter what we do, travel behavior is going to change, and as a result of sort of the cultural changes we've had the last couple of years. So I really appreciate the way you guys have done this. So all right, and one last call out to my fellow council member Fredson.
Yeah, I would just second that. And I mean, you're seeing announcements come from employers in downtown Minneapolis, about bringing people back downtown, and governors across the country talking about moving from pandemic to endemic stages. And I just think that generally there's a desire to get back to more normal. And with that, hopefully we'll see some rebound in ridership. So thank you.
And thank you. All right. Anything else from other council members? All right. Well, thank you very much, John and Eric. Very, very well done. And that actually concludes your business for this evening. So you're going to have something that we don't very often have, which is a short transportation committee meeting. So I wish it was warmer and you could go outside, but we're getting there. Spring will come before we know it, right? So, all right. With that, we can be adjourned. All right.
Thank you.
Have a good evening. Bye-bye.